Hello dear friends, let's talk about problems of Skoda Yeti. The Skoda Yeti is generally a robust and relatively reliable vehicle. However, when choosing a half car, driving in a region, how the vehicle was used must be taken into account. Many vehicles were overloaded with off-paved driving, which of course has an adverse effect on the overall condition. Such vehicles conceal various damage or excessive wear of the clutch and chassis. For petrol engines, it is necessary to check or change the distribution chain or belt, as well as to check the purpose for which the vehicle was used. For petrol engines, direct and indirect injection, it is advisable not to neglect spark plugs replacement. Over time, the coil is damaged, which leads to uneven work on the smaller cylinders. For engines with indirect fuel injection, it is recommended to replace the spark plugs every 60,000 kilometers. On TCI and FSI engines, every 50,000 kilometers, with more frequent driving around the city every 40,000 kilometers. In the case of the Skoda Yeti with TSI engine, there are rarely problems with the drive mechanism, chain or hydraulic spanner. The service life of the drive mechanism as well as the service intervals are affected by the engine oil change interval and driving style. Problems with the transmission mechanism are revealed by a noisy start. Lasts a few seconds. Usually when the engine is cold, for example, after a night standstill, but sometimes the chain is noisy with the engine warm, for example when driving a lot at low revs. Depending on the engine, the culprit is either a hydraulic chain spanner that is malfunctioning or the chain is stretched. The problem should not be ignored, and it is necessary to replace the complete engine drive mechanism, otherwise the chain can skip and cause much bigger problems. Depending on the type of engine, drive problems are manifested by a bright MIL warning light, engine diagnostics, poorer start, reduced power or poorer consumption. Depending on the time of engine, the manufacturer modified the engine drive mechanism during 2011 and 2012. Much of the propulsion problem has been solved within the warranty period, but many engines, especially those that are less used, can still act a propulsion problem. If it is not possible to find service history, or if the original chain is in the engine, it is advisable to replace the drive mechanism with modified components. TSI engines, the deposition of increased amounts of soot, either in the engine itself or in the intake manifold. Increased soot production in the engine compartment generally indicates long oil change intervals. The result is a gradual reduction in engine power, poorer engine performance, as well as the risk of valve overheating, increased wear on the turbocharger, as well as the engine itself. Therefore, it is recommended that the oil be changed up to a maximum of 15,000 kilometers per 1 year. With more vehicles used, of course, less oil change interval. Pay attention to the quality of fuel. From time to time, add gasoline with more octane, minimum 98, or regularly add, at least once every 5,000 kilometers, gasoline additive, especially if maintenance is neglected or service intervals are extended beyond 15 kilometers. Hydraulic valve lifters can become clogged. This problem is gradually reflected in a decrease in engine power, idling oscillation, subsequent loss of engine pressure, valve damage, excessive camshaft wear and increased oil consumption. Prolonging service intervals or using unsuitable oil gradually leads to excessive wear of the drive mechanism, faster stretching and increased noise of the timing chain chain drive motors. The TSI engine is sometimes a problem with the dirty catalytic converter, which is especially true for drivers who drive at a generally slow pace and the engine runs at low RPM. In the long run, this driving style runs the risk of catalyst clogging, which the control unit can sometimes consider to be a catalyst failure. It is recommended that you occasionally go out on the open road and ride a little harder. With TSI engines that are driven more frequently on shorter distances, especially with a cold engine, there is a risk that the engine oil will be excessively diluted with unburned gasoline, which brings additional dangers of excessive engine wear. The solution is to drive on the highway from time to time or change the engine oil more often. TSI engines often have a rough sound after a cold start, less cultivated operation and sometimes lower acceleration. This is caused by the sudden heating of the catalyst by raising the temperature of the exhaust gases. However, the regime only lasts for a while and does not mean a technical problem. TSI 1.4 TSI engine and 1.8 TSI is more likely to cause excessive wear of the variable valve timing mechanism, resulting in noisier and uneven engine operation, especially at lower revs, or error messages MIL, or reduced power. It is recommended to change the variator together with the drive chain. In early years, the 1.4 TSI was known for a problem with the turbine bypass valve, which is reflected in a drop in acceleration. Most of these errors were solved by replacing the turbine housing, which was modified. Occasionally there is an oil leak, mostly the hose for ventilation of the housing, usually at 1.2 TSI. For diesel engines with mileage over 150,000 kilometers, the problem of excessively worn floating flywheel can be present, which is reflected by vibrations at idle, jerking when moving, and noise at lower speeds. The most common engine failures of the 1.6 TDI and 2.0 TDI are breaking of the EGR valve radiator, more often in winter and especially in the case of vehicles, especially for vehicles driving on shorter routes. Coolant penetrates the intake fluid loss. Coolant loss can also be caused by the water pump, so it is recommended to change it together with the distribution, which saves work and avoids unnecessary problems. When driving more frequently over shorter distances, there are problems with the EGR valve, dirt, poor thrust, choking or safety mode, together with the engine light. The exhaust gas recirculation system controls two valves, one in pneumatically controlled through the radiator and the other via electric engine passes directly back into the intake. With an increased number of kilometers, the motor valve gradually becomes clogged, which causes excessive stress on the electric motor. The result is electrical burnout engine that controls the EGR valve. EGR valve and exhaust cooling system are quite expensive. 2.0 TDI 103 and 125 kilowatts. Diesel engines may be affected by the problem of vortex valve regulation due to soot clogging. To control the flaps, increased force is required, which causes the control rod to break and the system to malfunction. The error is usually reflected in the engine/increased power consumption, uneven operation, or switching to safety mode. Worn injectors come with more mileage. Excessive wear or malfunction of the injector may also involve the use of lower quality fuel, so it is advisable to add high quality diesel fuel from time to time. The injectors are more sensitive, especially with the 1.6 TDI engine. Excessive injector wear causes the following problems, such as a cold start of the engine, uneven operation, small fluctuations in speed, or poor engine power. Higher mileage carries a risk of a problem with the turbocharger, which is reflected in increased oil consumption, suction of oil into the intake, reduced/variable power, or a problem with the control of filling pressure. In the case of the 1.6 TDI Euro 5 engine, there is sometimes a slight engine shutdown, engine speed fluctuations, or difficult starting. The reason is usually incorrect data of the flow meter, which requires its replacement. However, it often happens that there are no problems, and the reason may be an unsuitable air filter, best to change the original, or a malfunction of the temperature sensor. Problems with the DPF filter usually occur only after higher mileage, usually over 250,000 kilometers, and if they do occur sometimes, they are mostly the result of frequent driving on shorter routes, when regeneration is insufficient and the filter gradually becomes clogged. Of course, the condition of the engine itself, especially the injection system, e.g. turbine, cylinder head, valve and piston, cylinder wear, also affects the life of the DPF. Problems with the DPF system are usually reported by means of an indicator light, switching the engine to safety mode. The approaching of the DPF filter is usually manifested by an increased frequency of regeneration with a slight increase in average consumption. In the case of a vehicle equipped with a 6-speed DSG transmission, the transmission must be properly checked. Gear changes must be noiseless or hard in both modes, automatic and manual, even at high speeds. Also, the rides should be as smooth as possible and without excessive vibrations. It is also important to carefully check the gear ratio with the levers on the steering wheel up and down. Problem with DSG: only occasional problems with control electronics, but be sure to change the oil up to 60,000 kilometers. For sports versions, every 30,000 kilometers, about 5 liters. Volkswagen G052182 A2A6. Oil change is especially important due to the formation of impurities from the joints, as well as due to small metal particles from the gears, which negatively affect the operation and life of the gear components. Problems with mechatronics or excessive wear and tear of the clutch mainly occur at higher mileage, mostly over 200,000 kilometers, or wild driving style, especially in combination with more powerful engines. DSG gearboxes are very good, but DSG gearboxes paired with powerful engines and neglected maintenance leave a mark, and the new owner expects expensive repair costs. The reliability and life of the 7-speed DSG transmission is somewhat weaker than usually in the case of the 6-speed DSG. Occasional problems are present at the mileage of over 100,000 kilometers of clutch overload, and there is a lack of mechatronics itself. You should also pay attention to starting the vehicle without gas when the driver turns off the brake. There is increased slipping and thus overheating of the joints, which negatively affects their life. All in all, care must be taken with this transmission, and if the vehicle has more than 100,000 kilometers, the functionality of the transmission must be properly checked. Possible repairs are very expensive. More often in the first years, they should have problems with vehicle electronics. This includes, for example, a non-functional air conditioning panel, no speaker, window or following mirror problems, and sometimes problems with the engine or ABS ESP control unit. A relatively common Yeti problem is surface corrosion. This is not a worse quality of corrosion protection, but structural properties that cause surface corrosion. The fender is more resistant to stones because it is protected by a protective transparent foil. The installation of this foil is therefore also recommended for the lower part of the rear door. Rust also appears on the top of the roof above the windshield. The culprit throws stones at her again. In addition, corrosion occurs on the rear doors, especially for the strips on the side of the window. In this case, the heat stretches the tape, the sharper edges of which gradually damaged the varnish, which led to the formation of rust. There are also noises from the interior plastics, especially for vehicles with higher mileage or if the vehicle is driven more often off the asphalt road. There is also a faulty air conditioner when the compressor is mostly faulty. The chassis have a relatively robust construction, and the loofah mainly occurs in strong blocks and shoulders after greater mileage. First, it is most likely that the loofah will appear in the front transverse stabilizers, which is manifested by sounds in the case of unevenness. Later, noise appears in the posterior strong block of the front shoulder and the lower sphere. Black lash in the rear trap occurs mainly after 200,000 kilometers. First, there is a gap in the strong blocks, which is manifested by the position of the rear wheels, similar to the letter A, as well as worsened driving characteristics, moving the rear when changing in the direction of travel. It is also recommended that the geometry of the trap be done regularly, at least every 2 years, otherwise the electric volt of the rear axle may get stuck, and it will be necessary to change the entire shoulder. With the 4x4 model, and especially with off-road vehicles, many mechanical damage to the chassis from driving on more demanding terrain must be taken into account, and the shock absorbers are subject to faster deterioration. With the 4x4 version, noise from the rear of the vehicle can occur over a number of kilometers. This is due to the imbalance of the PTO shaft. It usually helps to replace the balancing discs, but sometimes it is necessary to replace the entire cardan shaft, which is a more expensive repair. Pogon 4x4 Skoda Yeti. The advantage of Haldex is the low cost of service because it is only necessary to change the oil at 60,000 kilometers. It is recommended that the service interval be respected for a longer service life. All in all, the system is of course reliable with reasonable handling. The Haldex and rear axle will last hundreds of thousands of miles. Shortening of destroying Haldex will happen due to towing heavy trailers or excessive off-road driving, etc. In the long run, driving with improperly inflated tires is also inconvenient because the system is relatively sensitive to the difference between the speeds of individual wheels. When purchasing a 4x4 version, the functionality of the system must be tested. Service Skoda Yeti 1.2 TSI, 1.4 TSI, EA111 and 1.8 TSI engines have so-called maintenance-free chain. Diesel engines have a toothed bell where the replacement interval depends on the type of engine and the year of production from 180,000 kilometers to 210,000 kilometers or 8 years especially in the case of frequent trips around the city, or it is better to replace the gear belt with accessories for a maximum of 150,000 kilometers. Engine oil 100 should vary in accordance with the indicator on the instrument panel, which is sometimes 20,000 kilometers and sometimes up to 30,000 kilometers. However, practice shows that, especially for diesel and gasoline engines with direct injection, such long intervals lead to increased deposition of soot deposits, excessive wear of some components, and subsequent complications. Therefore, it is recommended to interrupt the interval and change the oil every 15,000 kilometers. In case of buying a vehicle with an unclear bust or with more than 150,000 kilometers of driving, it is recommended to do so. Washing, and in particular for the TSI for engines, also cleaning of the oil sump and suction vessels of the oil pump. Clogged suction vessels lead to lower lubrication oil flow pressure, which has a negative effect on the function of the hydraulic chain tensioner. Faster pulling can thus increase risk of slipping and engine damage. Limited hydraulic valve lifting function. Accelerated valve and cylinder head wear, limited lubrication turbocharger, and the engine itself faster wear. Don't forget to subscribe my channel, and if you're the owner of this car, then share your experience. It will help others to choose a car. Goodbye.